The silence that fell over Ukraine in the wake of their stunning long-range strike was not the silence of victory, but the eerie, breathless calm of the eye of a hurricane, a deceptive lull that lasted precisely 17 hours and 22 minutes, a period where the world held its breath, social media feeds refreshed in anxious anticipation, and intelligence agencies across the globe focused every asset they had on the Kremlin, waiting for the other shoe to drop, knowing that a regime built on the projection of absolute strength would never, let such a humiliating blow go unanswered, and that the response would not be proportional, it would be apocalyptic, a thunderous declaration meant to erase the Ukrainian victory from the map and from history itself through sheer, overwhelming firepower. That response began not with a roar, but with a whisper, a series of encrypted commands sent through the deepest, most secure channels of the Russian military at 21:09 on September 12, 2025, activating a carefully planned and horrifyingly comprehensive retaliation plan codenamed Groza, Thunderstorm, a multi-axis, multi-wave attack designed to leverage Russia's one remaining overwhelming advantage, its vast and deeply stocked arsenal of long-range missiles and its terrifying willingness to use them against civilian infrastructure as a weapon of terror. The first indication that the storm had broken came from early warning satellites operated by the United States Space Force, which detected the unmistakable infrared signatures of multiple rocket plumes igniting almost simultaneously from positions deep inside Russia, from hidden forest launch sites in the Murmansk region, from mobile launchers scattered across the arid steppes of Astrakhan, and most alarmingly, from the pitching decks of 2 Admiral Grigorovich-class frigates and 3 Kilo-class submarines lurking in the protected waters of the Caspian Sea, a coordinated salvo of over 80 missiles of various types. The new, hypersonic Zircons capable of evading all known defenses, the older but still deadly Kalibr cruise missiles, the ground-launched Iskander ballistic missiles, and the dreaded Kh-101 air-launched cruise missiles, now fired from 295 Bear bombers circling safely over the Russian interior, all of them arcing into the night sky on divergent flight paths, their trajectories calculated by powerful battle computers to arrive on target in a perfectly timed sequence of devastation intended to saturate and shatter the Ukrainian air defense network in a single, crushing blow. Across Ukraine, air raid sirens began their mournful wail, a sound that had become the soundtrack to daily life. But this time the alert was different, the sheer density of inbound tracks on military visual displays painting a picture of such apocalyptic scale that command centers in Kyiv, Dnipro, and Lviv fell into a moment of stunned silence before erupting into controlled chaos, officers barking coordinates, desperately trying to prioritize threats with a system that was already being pushed far beyond its limits, knowing that the sophisticated Western-supplied systems like Patriot, Iris-T, and SAMP/T were formidable but finite, with interceptor stocks that could never match the tidal wave of steel and explosives now descending upon the nation. The first wave was a masterclass in brutal military logic, comprised of cheaply produced Iranian-designed Shahid-136 drones and older missiles, their purpose not to destroy but to exhaust, to force Ukrainian air defense batteries to reveal their positions by firing their valuable interceptors at these decoy targets. A deadly game of whack-a-mole that drained resources and created fleeting gaps in the defensive shield. Gaps that were instantly exploited by the second, far deadlier wave of hypersonic and ballistic missiles screaming in at impossible speeds, targeted not at cities in a general sense, but with chilling precision at the very infrastructure that kept the nation functioning and the lights on. The Trypillia thermal power plant south of Kyiv, one of the largest in the country, was struck by a volley of 3 Zircons that penetrated deep into its structure before detonating, collapsing the main generation hall and sending a pyroclastic cloud of pulverized concrete and shrapnel into the air, instantly plunging over 2 million people into darkness. Minutes later, the Dnipro hydroenergo hydroelectric plant, a monumental Soviet-era dam on the Dnipro River, shuddered under the impact of two massive Iskander warheads that breached its massive concrete structure. Not enough to cause a catastrophic collapse, but sufficient to cripple its power-generating capabilities and send a torrent of water flooding into the lower districts of Zaporizhia, forcing the emergency evacuation of thousands in the middle of the night. The third wave was psychological warfare, a deliberate targeting of cultural landmarks and symbols of resilience. The historic center of Lviv, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, shook as a Caliber missile intended for an electrical substation veered off course due to electronic jamming and detonated mere meters from the centuries-old Lviv Theater of Opera and Ballet, shearing its ornate facade from the building. In Kharkiv, which had already endured so much, a pair of missiles struck near the derelict remains of the city's administrative building, a place that had become a symbol of the city's resistance. The blasts shattering windows for blocks around and wounding dozens of civilians who had dared to remain in their homes. But the true strategic heart of the Groza plan was yet to be revealed, for while the world watched the horrific spectacle of cities going dark, a smaller, more specialized contingent of missiles, guided by real-time intelligence from a Russian A-50U mainstay airborne early warning planes circling over the Sea of Azov, was hunting a different kind of prey, the mobile launchers of the Western air defense systems themselves. The very shields that were desperately trying to blunt the attack, and, in a devastating strike, a Patriot battery stationed on the outskirts of Odessa, its radar actively engaged in tracking a swarm of incoming drones, was located, targeted, and obliterated by a Kh-101 missile that dove onto its position, the explosion wiping out the launcher, its radar unit, and the brave crew operating it. A catastrophic loss that tore a massive hole in the southern defensive sector and allowed subsequent missiles to pour through unimpeded. The attack was not one-dimensional. It was accompanied by a massive cyber offensive that targeted emergency service response networks, knocking out communications for first responders and making it nearly impossible to coordinate firefighting and rescue efforts in the stricken cities, and a disinformation campaign on an industrial scale, with Russian state media and bot networks instantly flooding the internet with fabricated videos claiming the destruction was caused by errant Ukrainian air defense missiles, a cruel attempt to gaslight the world and demoralize a population enduring hell. For over 6 hours, the bombardment continued in relentless waves, a symphony of destruction orchestrated from 1,000 miles away, each explosion a punctuation mark and a message of pure, unadulterated vengeance, until finally, as dawn began to break over a scarred and smoking landscape, the last missile found its target, and the last drone was finally swatted from the sky, leaving behind a nation in trauma. Its power grid crippled, its cities battered, and its people once again facing the grim reality of a long, cold winter without heat or light. Yet, even in the midst of this calculated terror, the response was not one of surrender, but of a weary, defiant resilience that had become the national character. In blacked-out Kiev, volunteers immediately set up makeshift aid stations, sharing power from generators and stoves to make tea for their neighbors. Engineers and repair crews, working by flashlight and the glow of their phones, began the Herculean task of assessing the damage to the energy grid, knowing that the world was watching. And that giving into despair was exactly what the Kremlin wanted. The Russian response was everything analysts had predicted: heavy, brutal, and designed to break a nation's spirit. But in its overwhelming brutality, it may have committed a critical strategic error, for the images of a darkened Europe, of ancient cultural sites in ruins, and of civilians once again paying the price for Putin's wrath, began to flood global media, galvanizing international opinion and creating immense pressure on Western governments to finally, and without further hesitation, provide Ukraine with the final tools it needed to end the conflict for good. The F-16 fighter jets that had been so long delayed now promised for immediate deployment, the longer-range ATACMS missiles in much greater numbers, and for the first time, serious diplomatic discussions about providing a security guarantee that would forever shield Ukraine from the shadow of the bear proving that while Russia's response was heavy with missiles, it was ultimately light on strategy, a brutal spasm of violence that may have won a battle of terror, but in doing so, had likely set in motion the very conditions that would ultimately ensure its defeat in the wider war.